All right, Chapter 2, pretty brief, a lot of statistics. And what we're going to start with is some review, but we're going to look at some different notation of how it looks, and we're going to take a look at how we can use our calculator for this kind of stuff. So first thing, our measures of central tendency, which I have listed right over here. So our mean, remember our mean, that's just really our main average, where we add up, we get the sum of all the data, and we divide by how many there are. So we should be familiar with that. Median, we always want to think middle. It's the data that's right in the middle. And remember, our data has to be ordered numerically in order to find the middle. And lastly, mode, we want to think most. Which one occurs the most? Occurs the most. Okay. And mainly we're looking at mean and median. And then for our box plot, we're looking at what we call our 5-number summary. So with our 5-number summary, we should be able to make a box plot, but we have to find all 5 pieces of data. It's found by finding the median right away. So that cuts our data in half. We find the median. And then once we cut our data in half, we basically look at the median of our first half of data, which we call the first quartile, and then we find the median of the second half of our data, which we call the third quartile. And then the other parts of our 5-number summary are the minimum and the maximum. And if you remember, back in the day, you made a box plot out of that data. So if you take a look, our minimum and our maximum were made by little whiskers. And then our median was right in the middle of our, well, not in the middle of our box, but it's the middle piece. And then our first quartile was the left end of the box, and our third quartile was the right end of the box. And this tells us how our data is spread out. So if you remember from box plots, during each little piece here, so in this whisker, and then in this piece of the box, and then this big piece of the box, and in this whisker, it's broken up. That's where that word quartile comes from, because it's broken up into quarters, or 25%. So 25% of the data is in each piece. We also have a new notation for our mean. So we call this guy, this X with the line, we call it X bar. X bar. That represents our mean from here on out. We also have some other notation. For example, this Greek letter sigma, it kind of looks like a fancy capital E. It means sum. Okay, so sigma stands for sum. And what we use it for is something like this. If you take a look over here, it says it's got this E, so that means sum, so you're going to add. And this X represents your data. And the I represents which spot of the data. So if I did 23, 27, 31, that's the pieces of the data. So we would call 23 the first piece of data, 27 the second piece of data, 31 the third piece of data. And what this is saying is this X tells you to grab the piece of data at the I spot. Well, we're starting with our first spot, so you'd grab 23. And that's shown down in this green down here. So we'd grab 23. And then we would add it to the second spot. So this N up here tells us to go to the nth term. So that basically tells us to go to how many there are. And so that's shown down here in this green. So we're adding each piece of data to each other all the way until the last piece of data. So that capital E tells us to add, right? It gets the sum of every single piece of data. And we call this I the index of summation. It's just kind of saying which spot of the data that we're at. And how we can use this to represent the mean is by, well, we just said this thing basically adds everything up, the summation of all the terms, and then we divide by how many there are, right? So it's just kind of a fancy way to write it. So remember, X bar means mean. So to find the mean, we add them all up. That's that notation up above, and divide by how many there are. All right, so let's take a look at our calculator here. Let's go ahead and create a list, because we need to input a list in order if we're going to look at some statistics. All right, so to make our list, you notice we have a stat button, or statistics button. So I'm going to click on that, and right away it says edit. That's where we can edit our list. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to get in there. And if you take a look, I already have some lists in there. Well, there's 2 ways to clear the lists before I can type in my new information. One way is to simply press delete on each spot, and it keeps deleting the data. But what if there's just a ton of information in there? That might take a while. So let's say I want to clear list 1 and I want to clear list 2. You see how they're named by L1 and L2? What I can do is, I'm going to go back to my main screen. I'm going to go back to my statistics, and if you look, there's a clear list. So I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to select clear list. Well, I need to clear list 1 and list 2, L1 and L2. Well, where can I find those? Well, there's a couple of spots. They are right on your calculator, if you notice. I got a blue L1 right here, and I got a blue L2, so that's one way to do it. So I could hit like second and the 1 to get that L1, and then comma, and I could do the same thing there. The other place to find it is, if you notice, you have a list selection right here, so I could hit second and the stat button to get list, and then I could select the L2 from there as well. So 2 different places we can find it, so I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. So that just cleared both my lists. So now I'm going to go back in, and I'm going to edit, and now I can enter my data. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll skip ahead here as I go. So 25, hit enter each time. 27, enter. And if you take a look here where it says list 1, it tells you which term you're entering. So this is my third term I'm entering, so 33, enter. So now I have everything typed in, and I can just double check to make sure I have enough terms. So I should have 13 total terms, right? Because this is saying it's my 13th term. So if I count 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 13, I'm good. Okay, so my list should be in there. So my list is created. Well, now what can we do with our list? All right, let's find some information. So I have my list. So now to find all these things, well, some of them anyway, let's go back in our statistics. And if you take a look, we have calc, so we can make some calculations with our statistics. Let's go over. And this is one variable statistics, right? It's just only one kind of set of data. So I'm going to go ahead and enter. And yep, it was list 1, so that's perfect. Frequency list, we don't need anything else for that. So let's go down and calculate. Boom, there we go. So if you notice, X bar, that means our mean. So our mean is 29.0769. So we'll round it to 29.08. How about? That sounds good to me. So 29.08. It also asks for our 5-number summary. Let's take a look to see what else these things mean. See that we have our summation here, our sum of all of our terms. So basically this adds them all together right there. So that's kind of nice. And then it takes them and squares them and then adds. So that's a little bit different. And these two we'll get into a little bit later. So look at this, 13, what do you think that stands for? Oh yeah, N. That's how many pieces of data we have. We had 13 numbers. Let's scroll down. Ooh, there we go, 5-number summary. So we got our minimum, 14, quartile 1, 23, median 27, quartile 3, 38, and maximum 43. So I don't even need to go through the work of ordering these guys. I can just simply write this information down. All right, so I got all that stuff. So let's go ahead and calculate the range in the IQR, the interquartile range. Well, what does the range stand for? Well, the range, it's like how far do the numbers range? So from what range do they exist? Well, from 14 to 43, that's our range. So to find one number to represent that, we can just subtract our max and our min. So take our 43 minus 14, and that gives us 29. So our range is 29, and what about our interquartile range? Well, guess what? That is just the range of your quartiles. So you had your first quartile was 23, and your third quartile was 38. So we just subtract those two guys. So we got 38 minus 23. So our IQR, our interquartile range, is 15. Okay, well, what else can we do with this? Remember we said that with the 5-number summary, we can make a box plot? So let's go ahead and make a box plot with our calculator. All right, so we already have our list in there, so that's good. So now to create a statistical graph, they have this thing called stat plot up here. So I got to hit second, and then my y equals to get that stat plot. And then everything else should be off, but we want to turn one of these on. So I'm going to go into plot 1, and I need to turn it on. So this just basically says I can graph up to like 3 different plots. So I got it on now. Well, what kind of graph do we want? Not a scatter, not a line, not a bar. Right there, there's my box. It should look like it. We want list 1, and we only don't want to do it one time. Perfect. All right, so we got all that for information there. And let's make sure our window looks good. So if I go to window, oh no, okay, so I have my, this is still in my sequence mode, right, my recursion. So let's get out of there. Let's go back. Let's go into our mode. Let's get it back into function. Okay, we don't want that in sequence right now. So let's go back to our window. Now, there we go, just dealing with x's and y's. So the x, these should be our data, right? So we got, my smallest data is 14, it looks like, right? That was my minimum. So I could start at 10. That'd be fine. I could really start at 0. That doesn't, it's not like it's that far away. I'm going to start with 0. That sounds better. And then max, my biggest number is 43. So let's go up to 50. How about? And let's count by your scale, right? Let's count by maybe 5s or 10s. You can go by 10s. That's not too bad. All right, y minimum. Well, the box plot kind of puts it in depending on what your y's are. So I usually just go 0 to 10. That shouldn't affect it. If it's just one variable data, then we'll count by 1s. Resolution should be 1, and then we just leave that whatever it calculates. All right, so let's go ahead and graph. There we go. Got my box plot. Well, sometimes it's hard to see, well, where is this minimum? Okay, if we want to take a look, remember we can always click trace. And there we go. It tells me my median, 27, my first quartile 1, my minimum. So I can go scroll side to side to take a look at my data. And just remember, 25% of my data falls in here, 25% here, a fourth in here, and a fourth right there. Okay, so that's what we want to get out of our box plots. So a little bit of a review today, but we're just kind of looking at how it works on the calculator.